6 men acting as satellites to define the entire battlefield. In the 1960s, amidst the deadliest forbidden zones of the Vietnam jungle, LRRP teams were the only eyes that truly mattered. Today, modern armies rely on satellites. Unmanned aircraft can remain overhead for hours, while sensors and real-time data fill command screens with information. But in the jungles of Vietnam in the 1960s, none of that existed. There were no satellite, no drones, and no screens showing where the enemy was. To find answers, commanders had to send people into the jungle far deeper than the enemy expected and hope they could make it back. That is why LRRP existed. So, what equipment did they carry to establish this legendary legacy? Let's look inside the kit. Item 1, Field Binoculars. One of the most important tools carried by LRRP teams was not a weapon, it was a pair of binoculars. LRRP patrols were designed to observe, not to fight. Binoculars allowed them to count enemy troops, follow movement along jungle trails, and detect supply routes hidden by dense vegetation. On deep reconnaissance missions, the most valuable targets were not targets to be engaged. They were targets to be reported. Through binoculars, a small LRRP team could shape decisions made far behind the front lines. In that sense, binoculars turned a handful of men into the forward eyes of an entire formation. Item 2 PRC-25 radio. Seeing the enemy was only half the mission. Making that information usable was the other half. According to Doctrine, long-range communication from a patrol back to its base station was typically handled by portable SSB radios. The PRC-25, an FM portable radio, was used for internal communication, ground-to-air talking with aircraft, and as an alternate or relay system when needed. Radio did not make LRRP teams more lethal. It made their observations matter. A patrol that could observe but could not report might as well have never left the wire. For LRRP teams, maintaining communication was as critical as remaining hidden. Item 3 PRC-25 handset and antenna. The radio itself was useless without its supporting components. The handset and whip antenna determined how clearly a signal could be transmitted and received in dense jungle terrain. Poor antenna placement could mean broken contact. Good antenna discipline could mean the difference between extraction and isolation. LRRP teams learned when to transmit, when to remain silent, and how to manage antennas without exposing their position. Radio discipline was not a technical detail, it was a survival skill. Information only mattered if it could leave the jungle. Item 4, lightweight rucksack. LRRP teams carried everything they needed on their backs. Their rucksacks were modified to reduce weight as much as possible while still supporting multi-day operations. There was no room for unnecessary equipment. Every item packed had a purpose. If something did not contribute to observation, communication, or survival, it stayed behind. A lighter pack meant quieter movement, fewer injuries, and greater endurance. For LRRP teams, mobility was not convenience, it was protection. Item 5, water and purification. Water was never treated as an afterthought. Deep reconnaissance patrols often operated without resupply and without guaranteed extraction timelines. Canteens and water purification tablets were always prioritized. In jungle conditions, ammunition could run low and the mission might still continue. Without water, everything stopped very quickly. LRRP teams understood that hydration was directly tied to alertness, discipline, and decision-making. Survival was not an end in itself. It existed so the patrol could return with usable intelligence. Item 6, jungle fatigues, OG, 107, color, poplin, or ripstop. LRRP soldiers did not dress to look imposing. They dressed to function in the jungle. Their clothing consisted of jungle fatigues, also known as tropical combat uniforms, typically in an OG 107 color and made from lightweight poplin or ripstop fabric. These uniforms were designed to dry quickly, breathe in humid conditions, and resist tearing in thick vegetation. They were practical, not symbolic. There was nothing iconic about how LRRP looked, and that was intentional. Item 7. Jungle Boots. Movement through jungle terrain destroyed footwear quickly. Jungle boots were designed to drain water, grip uneven ground, and reduce foot injuries during long patrols. They were not built for speed, they were built for endurance. Blisters, infections, and foot injuries could end a mission without a single shot being fired. For LRRP teams, proper footwear was as critical as any weapon. Item 8. Boonie Hat. The Boonie hat served a quiet but important role. It provided protection from rain and sun, broke up the silhouette of the head, and offered better camouflage than a steel helmet in dense jungle. Unlike a helmet, it did not catch on branches or reflect light. It helped LRRP soldiers remain unremarkable and difficult to spot. The Boonie hat was not about protection from bullets. It was about not being seen at all. Item 9. Car 15. The Car 15 reflected LRRP priorities. It was compact, lightweight, and easier to manage during long movements through jungle terrain. The weapon was carried for self-defense and emergency break contact situations. LRRP teams were not equipped to win firefights. They were equipped to survive them long enough to disengage. If the Car 15 was fired, the objective was not to dominate the enemy. It was to escape. Item 10M 16A 1. Contextual. In some cases, LRRP soldiers carried the early M16A1. It was longer and less compact than the Car 15, but familiar and widely issued. Its presence depended on availability and mission context. Like all LRRP weapons, the M16A1 was not chosen for offensive action. It was a tool of last resort. Combat was never the objective. Avoidance always came first. Item 11. Private purchase knife. Knives carried by LRRP soldiers were often privately purchased. They were used primarily for utility tasks, cutting vegetation, preparing food, or assisting with survival tasks. Close combat was not their intended role. The knife represented self-reliance more than aggression. In an environment where resupply was uncertain, personal tools mattered. Item 12. Smoke grenade. Smoke grenades were tools for movement, not combat. They were used to mark landing zones or obscure vision during extraction. Smoke created confusion and bought time. For LRRP teams, a few seconds could mean the difference between disappearing into the jungle and being overrun. Smoke was not used casually. It was reserved for moments when remaining unseen was no longer possible. Item 13. Claymore mine. Claymore mines were carried for one purpose: emergency disengagement. They were not used to establish defensive positions or hold ground. They existed to slow pursuit long enough for a patrol to escape. A claymore was not a sign of aggression. It was a contingency plan. For LRRP teams, success was measured not by destruction, but by whether they could break contact and survive. Today, satellites and drones can observe vast areas from above, but in the jungles of Vietnam in the 1,960 beings were the only sensors available. LRRP teams operated inside that gap. They were quiet, uncelebrated, and often forgotten. Yet many major decisions were shaped by what these small teams saw, reported, and carried back with them long before the enemy realized they had been watched.